lovely listeners, you're listening to Sarah Cudmore from Collage app at Homegrown Learning. I'm recording a podcast today about supporting your child to read, write and to support them through their sort of maths development. I've had several requests lately for an outline of like the stages that children go through with those kind of core subjects, and I thought I would do this podcast to help those of you that are struggling with certain aspects. My intention with the podcast is to look at the more organic route to reading, writing and maths, as well as the more formal route, because I'm aware that us homeschoolers do things kind of, we're either following a particular route or we're a bit eclectic and kind of dipping in and out of things. So hopefully I can cover and meet the needs of all homeschoolers. So this isn't really aimed at people currently schooling at home, because obviously the instruction will come from the school at the moment, but you may be interested in the development anyway. So I'm going to start with learning to read, and obviously schools will introduce reading via something called phonics, and that's great in a traditional classroom setting, as it's a really practical way of getting large groups of children to read at the same time. However, the luxury of like learning at home means that you can kind of beat this approach through kind of layering lots of really organic reading experiences. So don't feel that phonics is something that you have to do to enable your child to read. Phonics itself is part of the national curriculum, which requires schools to teach children to apply phonic knowledge and skills as a route to be able to decode words. And the curriculum states for this that at the beginning of year 2, pupils should be able to read unfamiliar words containing graphemes, which is a letter that represents a sound in a word. And phonics is taught through a variety of approaches, so using individual sounds that corresponds to letters, learning sounds of groups of letters or consonant blends or syllables, and also pupils reading books, playing games and activities that contain the sounds that they're learning. And there are plenty of ways to introduce phonics if that is something that you feel would be helpful for your child. There are loads of companies offering programs to deliver this for you, and they're all slightly different in their approach. Many are now done through apps, so you can look for those on the internet if that's something that you want to do, and they're fine. But I would say that with apps, it's always worth remembering that children need lots of hands-on and lots of practical activities, and it's worth kind of researching and thinking about how your child learns best, and maybe blending some of the approaches if you do decide to use a phonics app program. So the organic route to reading is much more child-led, like with no age set out or no stage that they're expected to read by. No prescribed levels, unlike the school and the curriculum descriptions. So the use of phonics coaching here can still be useful, but it isn't actually the focus of learning to read by a sort of organic method. So the ideas that and this isn't set out in a particular stage, but these are just the ideas I'm gonna work through now. So I would just say that initially, just having a love of books, a real lovely selection of books in your house. You don't have to have hundreds and thousands of books. In fact, it's better to have less books and make sure that they're really rich with beautiful text and imagery, and have a wide range of books in your house. So, books as well as things like magazines, comics. You can also make sure that you can focus on, fiction. So you've got some lovely stories and fairy tales or poetry, but you might also have encyclopedias and information books about all sorts of things that may appeal to your child. And if you can start using a library from a young age, I know you can get lots of amazing text from the internet, and that's a huge valuable resource in itself. But going to the library and just seeing that vast range of books, and just sitting on the carpet with a pile of books that you've kind of pulled out of the shelves is quite awe-inspiring, I think, for young people. And it also does help children to develop an understanding of all the different genres of books. And to start with, I would always suggest that people check out books without words. So I'm talking about when they're really young. And this is great for them to start reading the pictures, so they start to create their own little stories, or you're creating their own little stories as you're sharing them with the children. And then you can introduce or have alongside books with beautiful imagery, engaging with your child as they're reading, and really trying to support them with their sort of creative, imaginative thoughts. So asking questions about the characters, or what do you think is going to happen next, and really just going with their thoughts and their feelings. In my opinion, I would try to avoid many of the phased school style reading books. In my experience as a teacher, actually children find them really quite boring. I don't know if your child's been to school, or people have been to school, but they will probably back me up here and just say that actually a lot of those stage books, because they're trying to limit the vocabulary in the books according to the stages of the child, they actually make the stories really dull, and the imagery sometimes is really off-putting. I'm not saying don't do that, and for some parents, that really helps them, and some children do love that, but check them out first. I do know that the Julia Donaldson books are some of the better ones if you do want to consider that route. Rhyming books are really great for children to notice and work with sounds within words. And actually the Julia Donaldson, she's notoriously known for her rhyming words in her children's books. So that's another reason for that being a better recommendation of reading books. When they start to read or decode words, it's so tempting to check that they're reading by getting them to read aloud. But I would really say don't force your child to read aloud. You can see if they're reading by kind of watching their eyes. You'll see them sort of tracking across words or looking at words. And it is great. And at some point, your child hopefully will feel happy to read aloud, and you can enjoy books together like that. But some children hate it, and it really can put a lot of pressure on children and possibly kind of put them off reading. So, just tread carefully with that sort of. And then I was going to say that as a parent, one of the most important roles we have is to model to our children. So it might not be something you've got much time to do, reading. But wherever possible, if you can model the enjoyment of reading, that does really help children to sort of connect to what and why people use books. So, give yourself a break, put the fire on, get a book and a cup of tea, and just, model reading, or however you want to do it, down on the beach in the summer or whenever. But if you can model reading, that's a really great thing for your child to see. And then you have kind of reading as much as possible with your child. This is a tricky one because, I know from when my children were at school and we were in that mode, it was forced reading. So every night it was like, let's read a reading book. And it became a forced thing, and the love and enjoyment and sort of warmth and connection between us just wasn't there. So rather than, whilst it's really important to read as often as you can with your child, it's also important to think about that connection. So if you're just stressed out and you've got a load of things to do, and you think, oh my God, I need to read it, I haven't done anything with them today, I would say just don't, and it's okay. And, the next day when you haven't got meetings or you haven't got phone calls or whatever you've got to do, to actually find some space and really cozy up on the sofa or in bed or wherever you want to be and really enjoy a book together. So that quality reading time, so that it's not forced, where you can really immerse yourself in the text with your child, will be much more beneficial than sitting at the dining table with a reading slot before dinner every day. And I love this next thought, is that reading can happen and take place anywhere. Like, lots of people love reading in bed before they go to sleep or in the morning when they wake up. But reading can happen on the beach. It can happen at home by the fire. It can be in the back of the car if they don't get car sick and they just enjoy getting a book. I always going to the library, getting a selection of books and getting in the car to drive home. The children are like flicking through their books and really enjoying a moment to kind of get inside the books and see what they're really like. So it really can happen anywhere. And again, that, modelling that can be really helpful too. And outside as much as inside, in the sort of spring and summer months, to be in your den outside, or just, on the bench in the garden, or take your book to the park. Children are playing and you're modelling reading, or maybe you're going to sit under a tree after you've had a play in the park and read a book, is really beautiful. And children seem to really enjoy reading outside as much as inside. Embracing and encouraging other people to read with your child. So I don't know if you're lucky enough to have grandparents around, but and at the moment whether you can see the grandparents, but grandparents are often really great at this. But you might also have like other family members or people that are really drawn to books, and that's really lovely for your children to be able to enjoy books with other people. And often that can even be a sibling, an older sibling, or, sometimes even a younger sibling trying to sort of connect with their older brother or sister. I've seen through sibling reading just some really beautiful moments where either one is supporting the other with their reading skills, but there's just that really lovely connection between the two of them over a book. A funny moment is when my daughter used to try and read to my her granddad's dog in the dog basket, which was always a lovely kind of vision that I'll hold on to. When they do start to read and decode words, it's really tricky for us as adults, because we want to help them as much as possible. But if you can stand back a bit from avoiding correcting words too quickly, because it can feel natural to want to step in and correct words, but being sort of mindful and careful that this can be actually really off-putting and make your child feel like they can't do it. And many children will actually ask for help if they don't understand something. So maybe just sort of stepping back, just staying relaxed and sort of looking for the signs from your child as to whether they want help or not is really beneficial in the early stages, so as not to put the child off reading. Audiobooks are great. I have found them to be just so fantastic in terms of like creating background. You don't have to be sort of sat still and listening to them. My children are often creating and stuff and making stuff while we're listening to them. We listen to them all the time in the car. They just absolutely adore them. But what I found just so great is that you just immerse your children in such a rich language. And I've noticed with my own children that their language skills their vocabulary that they use is just incredible. And that, I think, can only have come from the sort of immersing them in so much text. And, it's not forced. They love these books. But if we didn't have audios, they wouldn't be getting the amount of reading to them that they are now. And I guess my final note is to not panic if your child appears to be a late reader. I think in general, homeschoolers are pretty good at not being competitive with one another. Unlike when you're in school, you're kind of forced into that competitive, my child's on yellow books, oh mine's on pink, or and actually what I've noticed about the homeschool world is that children tend to read later if they're taking this organic route, actually sometimes till they're like 9 or 10, and then when they grasp reading, they fly with it. So I've seen children in the homeschool groups that 1 minute weren't reading, the next minute they're got these Harry Potter books and they're heads down just wanting to read all the way through it. So it's hard for us because we are ingrained in a system of where we're expected to get to certain stages at certain times. But if you are taking the organic route and you're unschooling and you're doing all of that, or even not unschooling, but being a bit more selective about different approaches to things, just be patient and supportive and just really enjoy learning. And I always say to parents that actually, even if your child got to 10 and they couldn't read, they will want to read. Children naturally want to be able to read, and actually you could then, even at 10, you could teach them to read very, very quickly. So it is not something that does actually take that long once you've got some of these other skills behind you. So and I've really enjoyed sort of reflecting on my own children's journey through using Collage app as a way of sort of just seeing their progress. I've got some lovely I have actually got the photo of Kiki in the dog basket reading to the doggy, and then I've got Finn, who was a reluctant reader and just struggled to get him to read, tried lots of things. And then, in the last 6 months, I can see I've got loads of images of him just reading in odd places, and he's got his encyclopedia out. And actually the other day, randomly, got a dictionary and just thought he'd play a game at finding some of the words in the dictionary and seeing how many of them me and Daddy know. And so I have really enjoyed seeing their journey, and I just want to reassure people who are sort of panicking about whether their children are at the right stage or whether they're going to even be able to read because they're not necessarily showing signs, to sort of not panic. The only time you need to be a little bit more focused in terms of where they're at with their reading is if you feel that at some stage you're intending to send them back to school. So, there are some homeschoolers who like to homeschool for the primary years and then send their child to school for secondary. And obviously in that situation, you're probably more inclined to be following aspects of the national curriculum. And therefore, I would be saying if you're planning to do that around when your child is 8, 9, you would need to start, thinking about supporting them or starting to think about looking at what stages they're at with their interest in reading to help them to be able to then get into secondary school and be at the same stage as other people. But even that, I would say just don't force anything on your child, but around 8 or 9, if you want to start looking, or you're worried about it, or you think they're going to secondary school, you can start to introduce it in a more formal way if you're required to do so. Okay, so moving on to supporting your child with their writing. And obviously the two go hand in hand. And actually, often children, but not always, often children will write after they have developed their sort of reading skills. Well, certainly in school, you tend to see them their reading comes, and then their writing comes. Not to say that they're not mark making or attempting to write words during that time, but often it comes in that order, but not always. And the other thing I was going to say is that, particularly from a school's perspective, often boys are more reluctant readers than girls. But again, not always the case. And I often used to feel in school that was probably down to the text that they were exposed to and the sort of level of interest the children had in the text. So that's something to bear in mind. So supporting your child to write is actually quite a huge topic. And I think for some parents, I don't think they realise how much is involved in pre-writing. So in terms of having enough fine and gross motor skills to be able to write. So I'm just going to unpick that a little bit. So in the early stages of development, before you even consider your child as a writer, it's important that they've had plenty of opportunities to experience things using all their senses. So really exploring what they see, hear, smell, feel and taste. And there's loads of research now to show that sensory exploration builds those nerve connections in the brain. Through sensory play, those nerve connections are built. And these additional connections help them to enable the child to complete more complex tasks, support their cognitive growth, their fine and gross motor skills, their problem solving, and their social and language development. So if you can let them embrace sensory experiences, I'm talking when they're really young babies, letting them eat with their fingers initially, really exploring how things feel, letting them be physical just as their body tells them to be, and, rolling around on the bed, jumping off the sofa, climbing a pile of sofa cushions will be, give them a real good kickstart in the right direction in terms of enabling them to write. It is sad, but increasingly we are living in a world where we are far more confined than we've ever been. Children don't go out and roam beyond their garden, and they don't play as they used to. And from a young age, some children are confined in things like bumbo seats. I can see the purpose of bumbo seats, but actually all what that does is it restricts the child's movement, and actually if that's done too often or for too long, that can really restrict some development. So, but there are other things like nowadays, paint is not, readily advertised in, pots where the children are whack an apron on and they're, splashing around all over the place. They're now in plastic tubes, which clearly say on the packaging, these prevent mess, and we're sort of focused on not creating mess that we're actually preventing children from being from going through that messy stage, which is a nightmare as a parent, but it is really important for them to be able to develop fully. So, and going back to a little bit that I said about the initial stage of not recognizing the physical strength that children need to write, because you think of a pencil, it's not very heavy, you're going to hold that in your fingers and write away, but actually it's not about the size or the weight of it, it's about the motor skills of the child. So you've got your fine motor skills, which is where your body requires small movements, like using tweezers to pick objects up, pegging things to washing lines and buttoning up clothes, or even using scissors and playing with construction toys like Duplo and building puzzles. And then you've got more gross motor skills, which is where your body requires the big movements using big muscles like the trunk, the arm, the legs for agility, balance and coordination. And some, I guess some better examples of the gross motor skills are maybe riding a bike or a scooter, or running and throwing, using the opposite hand to leg to bat something. The opposite hand to leg's really important. And going back to that baby stage, enabling your child to crawl, that cross-lateral movement is also really important in the writing stages. So in order for fine motor skills to develop, and the gross motor skills need to have been established, so that provides a solid base for the development and deployment of the fine motor skills. So thinking about the physical development needed, some of the stages that I think are actually quite useful, not necessarily that the fact that they're laid out in like age stages, but actually just the stages in general I think are useful, are in the document called The Development Matters in the early foundation stages. So that's early years foundation stage, sorry. So that's about birth to 5. That's like, it's not the curriculum, but it's what schools and preschools and childminders use to ensure that they're providing a broad and balanced experience for young people. And I think that's really, really useful actually. The age stages overlap, so and they're quite broad, but I just think I'm not going to go through each one, and I've written an article with them on, which is on my website, and I'll put a link to that at the bottom of the podcast. But it just talks about how children go from early mark making, using sensory approaches, to early mark making, so like drawing with sticks and sand, steam on a mirror, using their fingers. It also talks about it talks about how they use language. They start to use language as well, and the marks they make, how the marks change. So, for example, they start to draw things in a natural order, so using like vertical lines in their mark making. Then they'll go on with, you'll see horizontal lines, then there'll be circles, and then there'll be the cross shape and the star shape. Then they'll be using diagonals, right and then left, and triangular shapes. And then after that, wavy lines and zigzag lines. And so I think those sort of mark making shapes, if you're more inclined to be doing some activities that you're planning at home, you can make sure that you've got access to like a sensory approach to some of that mark making, if your children are young, or even if they're a little bit older but reluctant writers and maybe haven't had the opportunity to experience some of that. You might want to go back a step and just enjoy doing some mark making, getting the paints out, or getting some shaving foam and getting messy and making marks, or a lovely activity is drawing on each other's back and trying to guess what the other one's drawn. So that's the kind of start to some of the formal stuff that would happen before children are kind of school age ready. Where was I going? So and then they would start go into kind of reception and start to do some more formal stuff. And what I would say is, I'm kind of going to dip a bit in between because it's not quite. So that's a bit more the formal stuff. But so then you've got examples of taking that more organic route, such as exposing your child to writing through texts in books, in magazines, on posters. You have like little postcards or things on your fridge. Just maybe you've got like a little affirmation, or somebody's sent you a postcard and you stick it up on your fridge, and it says having a wonderful time. Anything with any kind of text. When you're out and about and you're looking at signs where to go, sort of, oh, look at this, oh, this is the right street we're supposed to be on, so that they're making those connections with writing and text around them. And I said it before, but as a parent, just modelling writing is huge for children. So just seeing their parents write in as many different situations as possible. So both writing by hand or, on text on our mobile phones, as so many of us do, is okay and is very much part of the future of the next generation. But it could be you're writing your shopping list on a post-it note, or leaving a post-it note up for your partner, or you've got your blackboard with your to-do list in your kitchen, or you're in the bathroom brushing your teeth and it's all steamy, and you just write a little message to your son or daughter who's next to you brushing their teeth too. Anything where you can model writing is amazing. There's some examples, like I love all those like fridge magnets where you can do little messages to each other and things like that. So anything that you can have around the house that just models text is fabulous. And I mentioned in my previous section of this podcast was about learning to read and going to the library, but actually going to the library, learning about text is really, really important in the whole writing development too. So it's a win-win both ways. So then eventually, with the organic route, children eventually just become really inquisitive about writing, and they start to copy letters. And then before you know it, these letters lead on to sort of words that they're copying, and then they eventually start to write. And that will come naturally, and they will have done I talked earlier on about the sort of mark making, the horizontal lines and all of those kind of things. They will have naturally done that to then get to the stage where they're ready to write, and they will have had all of that fine and gross motor skill naturally in their environment. So following getting to that stage where children are just naturally wanting to write, you can if you're just going to let them go organically, then that's fine. If you're going to start to think about how you can support their writing, you may want to help them. At this stage, you can start to think about like letter sheets for them to copy letters. You can make them at home really easily and cheaply yourself, and you can cover them in plastic or laminate them so that they can use whiteboard pens. Or you can buy such beautiful organic like wooden stuff now. I've seen wooden marble runs for tracing letters. So you put a marble on and then you can trace it with your finger for the alphabet. You can purchase apps that get your child to copy letters. Some writing fonts have like rhymes which go with them, so they have like a little story to writing each letter, which is really helpful for sort of children with additional needs or preferences to kind of different ways of learning. So there's some great resources to support children with writing. I'd always suggest starting with the lowercase letters first, and then when they're confident with them, you can work on the uppercase letters, and you can introduce them into an ordered list. I've written an article about the list, which is on my website, and it has that order. So I'll put a link on here if you want to have a look at that. And this is quite a debated topic now, but I taught my children to write with a cursive font from when they first started to show signs of wanting to write, and this is highly debated because in theory it's more complex for them to do that, but on the other hand, children learn in printed font. And some children, particularly if you're following on an organic route, will develop their own handwriting anyway, and people aren't worried about that. But if you are following a bit of a formal route, or you are thinking of reintroducing them back into school at some stage, cursive font handwriting is part of the primary curriculum. And so my argument was always like, you'd start teaching them printed font, and then you've got to then 2 years later start teaching them a cursive font. And for me it seemed like a waste of time, really. And I did this in my own school with the children in our school. It was part of our policy. Our writing policy was to teach children cursive writing from reception. And if children are ready to write with all the right skills and all the right physical development, they take on that cursive writing absolutely fine. The only thing I would say is that they are slower to write, because the cursive font is that bit it's got additional sort of structure to it, so it takes a bit longer. But then some of the other bonuses of that are that because you kick in to each letter, as it were, you actually help children to create an anchor to a letter, which then, if you're ever writing on lines and things, helps you to keep it all in a sort of uniformed size. And it also, writing in a cursive font is actually really quite helpful, I think, for special needs children, because for them, when they go to start to write spellings, for example, let's take the word cat, and they have to remember the sound for each letter as k, a, t, but your mind has to remember the letter formation for each letter. But if you're learning it in a cursive font and it's all joined, it's one formation, one letter, one word for cat. So it can be helpful from that respect. But, you know, this is totally up to you. I'm just telling you what's worked for me. And so, yeah, do go and have a little look at the groups of letters that I would have introduced them to because of that. And if you're Googling writing letters, order of grouping letters to write, for example, you'll find lots of different suggested ways. And to be honest, it doesn't really matter a great deal, but you want to think about whether you're doing cursive or not, because that does have some implications into the easiest route, but they'll all get there in the end, so don't worry too much. Something else I wanted to talk about in terms of writing was using rubbers. So I didn't introduce my children to rubbers until quite recently. So I think Kiki was 6, so Finn would have been 8. And the reason behind that was because often when children have rubbers and they use them, particularly in school, it's all about perfection and it's about getting letters and things right. And I was really adamant that I just didn't want children, and again, I would not have rubbers in reception classes either. But it was really important for them, just, you know, if they make a mistake, just, you know, draw a line through it, do it above, do it next to it, it doesn't matter. And actually it has really helped my children just totally not worry about making mistakes and thinking that everything has to be perfect and what is perfect. So, you know, something just to be mindful of. I know children love rubbers, particularly those ones that smell delicious. But I would suggest, you know, just holding off and introducing them a bit later when you can see that your child's like comfortable with making mistakes. If you've got a child who's been writing, or perhaps you've been doing stuff at home but they're just like really struggling, or it's like, I don't know, it's just so difficult to get them to write, then you could look at Julie Bogart's Brave Writing, which I think is really quite good. And she suggests like scaffolding children through the stages. I certainly did this naturally with my own children. So when they couldn't write, but they were just at that stage where they were like mark making, you know, doing odd letters. But like I can remember Finn with his little ukulele pretending to make songs up, and I would say to him, "God, Finn, that's an amazing song," or "Let me write that down so we've got the words." And so I would scribe for him, and then we would celebrate what he had written, even though it had been my writing. So I wanted him to see himself as a writer, and this is really exactly what Julie says. And the next stage for her is then partnership writing. And then she talks about like kids taking ownership of their writing and really going with it. And sometimes they dip a bit between the two while they're sort of lacking confidence or not quite ready for the next stage. So I do think that is really good, and that could be helpful for people who are really struggling perhaps their children are a bit older and they really want to sort of engage their child in writing. And then when you think about writing itself, the national curriculum, writing section of the national curriculum is basically made up of transcription, which is the spelling and the handwriting part, composition, which is the articulating of ideas, structuring them into speech and writing, and vocabulary, grammar and punctuation. And it's taught through the different genres, such as, so you've got narrative, which is, stories, for example. You've got poetry. You've got non-chronological reports, which is, writing about a topic that has a range of facts, for example. And you've got recount, which could be classed as diary entries or something like that. Letters, instruction writing, which could be instructions for like writing a recipe or something. Explanation writing, which is explaining how or why something happens. Newspaper reports, biographies, and persuasive, which your persuasive is your, writing arguments for and against something, for example. But there's been loads of debate around the English writing curriculum, which I'm absolutely thrilled with, particularly the grammar, and whether teaching it is now relevant for our young people. So I would really say, if you are like dipping in and out of like formal, informal kind of route, or you're taking a formal route, to actually think about what you're delivering to your child and whether you feel it's necessary for the future. And if you don't do it. This is the sort of luxury of us homeschooling, is that we are choosing to deliver things or support our child or facilitate learning where we feel it's necessary. So there are lots of debates, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were some changes to the national curriculum in the next couple of years, particularly the English curriculum. The only thing... Oh, so I was going to mention about having, what kind of resources to have around the home. And I think it's really important to think about this, actually. So like most people have, pens, biros, and kids have, their little felt tip pens and all those kind of things. But just thinking about, having things that they can access, like blank postcards, envelopes, different types of paper, notebooks, sketchbooks, post-it notes, pencils, pens. There's so many awesome pens you can get out there. Smelly pens, metallic pens, biros, gel pens. To just sort of have a rich larder of resources that your child can dip into and feel really like special when they're writing is really great. I can remember even when the children were little, like, those bath crayons that you take in the bath with you, can write on the side of the bath. And things like that are just make writing a bit more magical, really. And my daughter recently, she loves baking cakes, and one of her favourite things to do is those little edible pens is to write on the top of the cake. So she's writing little messages for people who are going to be eating her cakes, which, is just a nice example of just making writing fun. One of the best things that I bought my two were calligraphy pens. Kiki's got this like glass pen, which she dips in ink and writes. And Finn's got like a proper calligraphy with different nibs, and they love it. And I love seeing how like they love making their writing all fancy, and I think that's the difference between like school and home, is that you can do that. It's not meant for display purposes. In school they spend so much time writing something, then writing it up in a neat form to go on the wall, and but actually just spending the time just enjoying writing and making it gorgeous. And there's so many books nowadays with that kind of handwritten text in them, so I just think any opportunity you can to make writing not feel like another arduous like lesson is great. And the other thing I was going to suggest was, one of the things that I have found really useful in terms of writing is before like perhaps going into those genres of writing that were talked about within the national curriculum, was the national curriculum does have 100 high frequency words, which are really, really great to make sure that your child can read and can spell, because I think they make up, don't quote me on this, but they make up something like 40% of the vocabulary of the text that you read in books is made up of these words, and they're tricky words, so they're not words that you can particularly sound out. So I made that a focus with my two, was to learn those. And we just did them in a really fun way. So Kiki's really kinesthetic. She's really physical. So for her, if it's a tricky word, spelling it out, she'll make, like if it's out, the word out, she will make the O with her hands above her head and then into a U and then into a T, and she'll jump it and she'll say O-U-T. Finn loves making mnemonics. So he's just done one for spelling the word 8. So he's done eating in giant high towers, and he'll remember those and he can spell them. So it's kind of just trying to make things more fun than just copying, write, spelling test and that kind of thing. And those words have really helped with their reading as well. So that's been like a sort of a dual kind of thing there. But of course, like in this day and age, some people are questioning like the need for handwritten skills when you can use a dictaphone or a voice to text function. So for this reason, some parents do decide to follow an organic route and then introduce them to like touch typing, which actually even touch typing, with the amount of children gaming now, some children don't even need to like have that sort of touch typing exposure. But it does enable their children to do all their writing on screens and write things at greater speed. So it is all about personal preference and what really fits with your style of homeschooling. But hopefully there's been enough within this sort of writing thing to make you think, yeah, I feel comfortable with that kind of element of it, and I can move forward on that, or yeah, that explains a little bit more. And so I'll put the links that I've mentioned in here, and I've got some sort of resources that I potentially would recommend in terms of like letter joining and things. So I'll put those links onto the podcast page. And then finally, we're kind of talking about supporting your child with maths. So maths, I feel, in fact, I've had more questions about maths from parents than any other subject. And I think parents often feel that they can't help their children so much with maths. And a lot of the people that have sent me questions are people whose children have been in school and they've withdrawn them, or they're in the sort of COVID thing at the moment. So, but one of the things, so there's two kind of things actually. So parents feel that they can't support their children with maths sometimes has stemmed from their own bad experiences of being taught maths at school, getting things wrong, being made to feel silly, not being able to rapid recall the multiplication tables, being made to stand at the back of the room, all those kind of things. So that's some reason that they've got that kind of fear element to maths. But then some of it is about particularly people who've had children in school, where they've had those, worksheets come home with maths, and they're surrounded by like these different modern methods of doing all of these subtraction, division, whatever. And I think parents just feel a bit like, oh gosh, that isn't the way I was taught, and I can't really help you with that because I don't know that method. But so I've written an article on this on my website, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about it as I talk through some ways that you can help your child with maths. So firstly, I would say, if you've got any inhibitions around maths, just don't share them with your child, okay? Because they can rub off and they can cause unnecessary anxiety around a subject which is actually just so much fun. If something's tricky because you haven't seen it before, just say to your child something like, well, we didn't cover this when I was at school. Let's look it up. And I think the thing about today is that there is such a wealth of tips and tricks and support on the internet that you can Google, thank you. You can Google, how do I work out what cube numbers are, for example, and there'll be an answer for you, and probably even a video clip, like a YouTube video clip showing you how to do it. So, don't be frightened, because we are in a world where everything is out there to be accessed. My next big tip is to make maths practical. Like, generally, children don't enjoy endless worksheets or textbook maths, and it is actually it's unnecessary to be sort of going through maths in such a laborious fashion, really. I'm not saying that that children don't need practice with calculations and things, but they don't need to be doing endless calculations. And certainly if your child's got 1 or 2 or 3 right, do they then need to do 30 of them? Like, it's just trying to keep your child engaged and have a love of that subject. So yeah, I just think maths is really practical, and you can really help children to love maths by sort of creating more practical activities, which I'm going to mention a few. Instead of exercise books, I do have some exercise books, and we have done some calculations in there, but I don't always do that. I use a little whiteboard a lot. And really, the sort of reason behind that is because, whiteboards are so lush in the fact that you wipe little bits out. So if you make a mistake, it's no big deal. You can wipe it, you can cross through it, and nothing's kind of permanent. And I think the thing about exercise books is that, teachers need them almost in school. They can see the mistakes that children make, and it helps them to plan future lessons. But at home, it's kind of not necessary, because you've only got a couple of children maybe, and so you can see when they make mistakes, and you can wipe things and feel less precious, and just be more focused on the little task at hand. So I see them as like a sort of side to whatever practical maths we're doing. And I use Collage app to load up all the images. So as they're working on things, I might take a quick photo of their little whiteboard and a little photo of what they're doing, and then I can load it up onto the Collage app as part of their learning journey, which I love, because it's just saving paper, and everything's stored chronologically, so I can really keep track of like what they're doing and see what they've covered. If you are formally homeschooling, you can actually also attach those to a national curriculum objective for maths and tick it off as you like. But if you're unschooling, you can just attach it to maths as a general subject and get a beautiful chronological report of their progress. So useful either way. And I'd always say with maths, make it purposeful. So whenever you can, model how you use maths. So let's just take a maths example. So like, I don't know, I had a problem with the car. Last week, the garage rang me and they said it's going to cost like £369 to fix it. But my husband's friend Bob over the road, he says that he can get the part for £80 and he'll only charge me £50 to fit it. How much would I save? And it's kind of like just saying it out loud with your children around. Like, they love to solve problems and be the detective. And I'm like, last year we had to paint the outside of our house because it was all grim and green and yucky, and I just got the kids involved in like working out the area of the walls so that I knew how much paint to buy, and it was just lovely, practical, real examples of using maths. This is a bit debatable, but give your children pocket money. Yeah, they'd love me. No, whatever, if you can, and if you think it is something that would help, we give our children pocket money, and we had a big discussion with them. So we, what could we afford? Why can we only afford that much or this much? And we actually opted. So we've had and played with a lot of coins and notes as part of practical maths. But, the future of money is definitely going to be card based. It's cash is being is not potentially something that's going to be around for forever. So we chose a bank account for each of them with a bank card, so that they could experience actually using their electronic bank card in the same way that we do. And they have an app which shows them how much they've got and all that kind of thing, and every time it gets paid in. But within that, we wanted them to experience like buying real things. So we've given them a clothing budget. So it's a tiny little budget, but they are to buy their clothes with it. And the debate with them has just been so beautiful, listening to it, like, oh, well, they've suddenly become aware of buying things secondhand, of mending clothes. And we are really lucky. We do get hand-me-downs from lovely friends and family. So, and now they're suddenly so much more grateful for those hand-me-downs. So it's just an example of just trying to get them a little bit more aware of like buying things other than buying toys or things that they particularly want. And then just thinking about like, how does maths fit into every aspect of life, because it really does. So like, traveling, how far is it to get somewhere, getting kids involved in navigating the routes and using compasses and ordnance survey grid references. They love all of that, being little detectives, saying like, we're going to go here today, as the crow flies, how far is that, as the route, what route should we take. And we've talked about money, but how much things cost, researching the difference of costs. The percentage of money off is a really great one. Savings and interest earned is a great one too to talk about. Or if you're moving house, like talking about how much you have to pay and how all of that kind of stuff works. Cooking is just huge and awesome, but like, interestingly, cooking in the national curriculum there's no sort of interlinked bit, but actually, timing, temperature, measuring ingredients, weights, volume of liquid, dividing cakes up into sort of fractions and percentages. The links are huge. And then you've got like your sporting stuff. So a lot of people have on their phones, don't they, how many steps they've done or how many minutes of exercise or whatever. But, just being more aware and using those and recognizing the maths in that. I think about like house maintenance and construction and that kind of thing, and decorating and measuring for new furniture or garden layouts, or, how much earth you need to fill a pot to get your growing going. And then one area that my kids love is around business. Last year my daughter made these squidgy things out of balloons, so she filled each balloon with different ingredients, and then she made a shop. But we did all the kind of business studies stuff around it, which was, mainly about maths. How much do we cost? Let's break down the materials that you've used and the ingredients, and how much would you need to sell them for to make a profit. And that they really seem to love. So not only does maths fit into every sort of aspect of life, but it also fits into every subject. So there's loads of cross-curricular links that can be made. So let's give some examples. Would be like in science, you're talking about capacity, timing experiments, measuring things, gardening, plant growth, how tall something's grown, keeping a plant diary, months of the year, and temperature. Then you've got like music, patterns and sequences of music. You've got design technology, you've got shapes, 2D, 3D patterns, angle symmetry, dimensions, area. English, you've got symmetry of capital letters, spacing, indents, numbered bullet points. Reading, like can speed read, do little speed read sessions to sort of get your pace of reading up, if that's what you want to do. How many words can you do in 2 minutes or whatever. RE, even you've got like the sort of symmetry and lots of the symbolic images that you see for different religions. And history, you've got the timeline. PE, we talked about sport, timing yourself, how many steps, how many goals, a scoring system for a game you've made up. So lots and lots of different subject, or math seems to fit into pretty much every subject, I would say. So following the national curriculum, if you choose to, like, it is useful if you are considering taking GCSEs, for example. So if you're thinking of taking GCSEs, I would suggest that from either 12 or 14 onwards, you start to think about doing GCSEs and getting some of the resource books from whichever examining board you're going to do, and start to work through them. If you're intending to send your child to secondary school, also be mindful of the national curriculum prior to that, and at what level they would be at. But other than that, if you're not, and you're unschooling, you're taking that organic route, just enjoying maths is it's such a fun and pleasurable subject that there's so many links that you can make to all the things that you're doing that will help your child just make those connections. In terms of maths resources, I just sort of got a little list of some things that I think are really useful. So we've got a big height chart in the house. I think lots of people do that in one form or another, but the kids do love that. Having a clock up in the house, perhaps even like digital and analog clock, is really, really helpful, and sort of making the links between them as often as you can. Thermometer, you got a thermometer for your body temperature, but you could also have a temperature gauge for food, or an outdoor thermometer to see what. In fact, my kids love that outdoor thermometer to see what the weather and the temperature is. I bought the kids a wind measurer recently, which has been caused a lot of fun, and kind of seems to go everywhere with us. Compasses, so like compasses for drawing circles, but also little compasses for navigating where you're going. Set squares, rulers, measuring tape, one for measuring parts of your body, and like a more rigid metal measuring tape. Scales for your body, also food scales. Measuring jugs of different sizes is really handy, but also actually measuring jugs in general without any measures on them are also really fab for estimating the sort of volume that they might hold. Stopwatches, watch. I do think when your children are learning to tell the time, there's some great the simplest kind of watch that you can buy is better to start with, because watches are pretty fancy these days. They do all sorts of things, but and then small mirrors for doing symmetry work. I love symmetry work. Do some beautiful artwork related to symmetry and using mirrors and things like that. Squared paper is really useful. Tracing paper, it's really expensive, tracing paper, but it is useful for when you're looking at shapes and doing things like that. Board games, the more board games you can have, the better. Dominoes and packs of cards, for example. So there's some practical resources. There is a lot more, I'm sure, but just as a little helper for thinking about stocking up the house. But really, it's just to say, whatever you do, it's about making maths enjoyable. And actually, some of the parents that had those awful starts to their own maths learning when they're younger, by sort of doing things differently, making them practical and fun, you might even have a love of maths that was lost from your childhood. And I think the other thing is to not be frightened of working alongside your child. So you don't have to know the answers to everything. All you are is a facilitator for finding the answers, and to not see yourself as having to be the teacher, but actually just helping your child to get that thirst for learning and being inquisitive about numbers and geometry and all the other aspects of maths that there are. So I really hope that this podcast has been useful to you guys. And if you do have any more questions, do send them in, because I like to make sure that my podcasts are meeting your needs. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please do leave me a review so others can see that you've enjoyed it. And until next time, keep calm and keep calculating.